Hello. So this week we're going to be beginning our distress tolerance module. I hope that you found the mindfulness skills that we've covered the last couple of weeks to be useful and that you're practicing and starting to build those mindfulness muscles. And I want to use this video to give kind of an overview of what distress tolerance even is and the purpose of the distress tolerance DBT skills. And so, distress tolerance is pretty self-explanatory. It is about tolerating intense stress, right? So instead of trying to change our emotions, which is more of the focus of the emotion regulation skills, distress tolerance is about how do we weather or tolerate the storm of emotions and experiences that aren't necessarily within our control to change. And so the distress tolerance module breaks the skills into two different categories. The first one is the crisis survival skills, and those are about tolerating distress, whatever it is, in the moment, in the short term. Whereas the reality acceptance skills, which we'll cover after the crisis skills, are more about how do we tolerate and accept situations or experiences in our lives that are not within our control, but are more of a long-term problem. So in terms of the crisis survival skills that are focused on tolerating intense distress in the moment, in the short term, we start this week with the first three skills, which are accepts, self-soothe, and improve. So accepts, each letter, it's an acronym, so each letter stands for something that you can do to help distract yourself from whatever painful distress you're experiencing in the moment. Instead of going over each letter, I encourage you to read the blog. But really, the focus of accept is to distract. So we don't always want to distract ourselves from our emotions, but in times of when we are completely overwhelmed and something is just, too painful to really problem solve or work with in the moment, what can be more useful at times is to distract ourselves from that intense distress while we wait for that kind of peak of the crisis to come down a little bit. Because any really intense emotion or urge to act in some kind of unhelpful or destructive or harmful way, that comes to a peak and it passes. It doesn't last forever. And so accepts is about how do we distract ourselves temporarily while this intense distress peaks and comes down. So the next skill that I cover in the blog is self-soothe. And self-soothe is about nurturing and comforting ourselves through our five senses. And so I talk about creating kind of this self-soothe toolkit, so to speak, that covers, breaks it down into all of the different physical sensations. So whether that's sight, hearing, touch, taste, what am I missing? Movement. I think there's one other one in there, but I don't even remember what I just said. But what are different things within each of those categories that we can kind of create this toolbox for? So when we are experiencing intense distress in the moment, we can look at this toolbox and utilize, one of our senses, physical senses, to kind of soothe and calm and be kind to ourselves through tapping into our physical senses. So, one example is what is a kind of sight that can, using your vision and sight, what is something that is pleasing to you, is comforting, it brings you joy. So, you'll see I create like an example on the blog of my own toolkit, and something on there is like looking at pictures of my niece. She's 3 years old and she lives in Montana, and a picture of her just, laughing or smiling brings me joy. And so that's on my toolkit to use sight. And I have examples for all of the senses, and you can create your own toolbox to use as well, because what's on there for me is not necessarily going to be what feels soothing and comforting for you. And the last skill that I cover this week is improve. And improve, like accepts, is an acronym, and so each letter stands for something different. But the focus with improve is not to distract, but to replace whatever negative thing is going on with something positive. And so there are different ways to do this, as each letter of improve stands for. And you can look at the blog to see that. But the overall focus of improve is to replace the negative with the positive, because as hard as the positive can seem in the moment, there's usually a way to tap into that and focus the attention there. And I'll just end this video reminding you that as we're going through all of these skills, the distress tolerance skills right now, we want to be practicing all of the DBT skills from this mindfulness foundation in terms of focusing on the present moment in this non-judgmental, open way.